beliefs such as do men and women differ on average in their cognitive or personality characteristics? Are police shootings racially biased? Um, is there such a thing as rapid onset gender dysphoria? And are there social influences in the massive growth of transgender adolescents or pre-adolescents? Good luck in saying that we should try to get to the bottom of those answers by looking at data. Those are cases where merely uh, uh, proposing, even asking those questions, can sometimes teach people, and there can be efforts to cancel them
Right.
for this. The acceptable belief is the one that aligns with certain supposedly social justice objectives.
Hello, my geeslings. This is Mother Goose Robinson Earhart and Pins the Podcat with the introduction to the very special 100th episode of Robinson's podcast with the exceptional Steven Pinker. And Steve, who pretty much everyone will be familiar with, is Johnstone Family Professor of Psychology at Harvard and among today's most recognizable public intellectuals. And I suppose that while this may literally be because of his phenomenal hair, which I'm quite jealous of, it's predominantly for the strength of his work. And so Steve is an experimental cognitive psychologist, and he writes on language and mind and their relationship to the evolution of human nature. And in this spirit, he's the author of a number of terrific books like The Better Angels of Our Nature and Enlightenment Now. The content from some of the content, at least, from both of which make their appearance in this conversation. But in this episode, we discuss Steve's most recent book, Rationality, what it is, why it seems scarce, why it matters, which came out in the fall. And Steve identifies a number of dimensions to rational thought. So, logic, Bayesian reasoning, an understanding of probability, decision theory, a few others. And we talk about the evolutionary basis of rationality, how rationality is subverted by conspiratorial thinking and the madness of crowds and some other factors, and how more broadly it relates to enlightenment and human progress. But I really think that of crucial importance, not just for the podcast, because somehow this hasn't come up in the past 99 episodes of the show, or academia, but really the entire human world, is that we also talk about free speech, its relationship to rationality, and how it is very much under siege in many quarters today. And as I was thinking about this after we spoke, my mind kept coming back to a quotation from Roy Sieber, who was a historian of African art. And Roy Sieber wrote, "The history of taste is a story of constantly shifting attitudes, which are not cumulative and which are neither inevitable nor infallible beyond the moment they are in favor." And I think I first came across this quote in high school, and it's often on my mind because, independent of taste in African art or art in general, I find it so often relevant because what Sieber is so perceptively pointing out is that we, people in general, always feel that we're at the apex of civilization. Even if this doesn't extend to contemporary scientists or thinkers who recognize there's always progress to be made, people have always thought that they'd reached the pinnacle of morality or artistic taste or cultural sophistication in so many ways, but we're always wrong. And it strikes me that many people today are laboring under this same delusion. And one of the key purposes of free speech, of freedom of academic inquiry, is to ensure that we're not blinded and bound by prevailing ideology or limitations that would otherwise retard our progress, so that in the pursuit of truth, there can always be avenues open to finding it. And if freedom of this sort were wholly stripped away, then we might still be toiling under this delusion that the earth was the center of the universe, or that women were subordinate to men because God made them in man's image, or any number really of other silly things. And people have said that sunlight, in this case, under the scope of free speech, free inquiry, and rationality, is the best disinfectant, and I agree. And in the same spirit, Steve writes in his book, disagreement is necessary in deliberations among mortals. As the saying goes, the more we disagree, the more chance there is that at least one of us is right. I think that's a good place to end this introduction. So there's a link to Rationality in the description. Steve's website is stevenpinker.com, and you can also find Steve on Twitter at sapinker. So without any further ado, I hope you enjoy this great conversation as much as I enjoyed having it with Steve. This is going to be my 100th episode, and I thought rationality would be a great topic for two reasons, at least. And first, I mean, it's an ideal, not just in philosophy and all of academia, but the last 99 episodes of the show. And second, because in many ways it seems to be under attack right now. Not that this hasn't been the case often or always throughout the past. But before we get into the specifics, I'd like to start with why it became such an important topic for you recently, to the point that you wrote a book with precisely the title, Rationality.
Like a lot of cognitive psychologists, I have long taught the research on human irrationality, the famous work by Amos Tversky, Daniel Kahneman, Paul Slovic, and others. Great fun to teach. I think it's something that every educated person should know. But it also raises the question of whether we have a responsibility to teach the tools of rationality that aren't necessarily intuitive, but that also should be part of everyone's education. Just everyone should have some grasp of logic and probability, including Bayesian reasoning, the basic stance of game theory, expected utility theory, correlation and causation, signal detection theory, that is trading off misses and false alarms in consequential but uncertain decision making. I've always thought that there ought to be a course in the university that, if I had my druthers, everyone would take on these basic tools of reasoning that we social scientists and philosophers take for granted. They're second nature to us, but we learned them, and no matter what you study in a university, they are a part of sound reasoning. So I mounted a course in Harvard's general education curriculum on rationality. And a couple of things happened. One is, as soon as I told people I was teaching a course on rationality, the first question people had is, that's great. You can explain to me how Bayes' theorem works. No. The response was, okay, can you explain why the world is losing its mind? Can you explain QAnon and New Age crystal healing power and vaccine resistance, conspiracy theories? So I knew that I had no choice but to deal with those topics. And those aren't a standard part of the cognitive psychology curriculum on heuristics, biases, fallacies. But I knew they had to be included. Then I offered the course, and the pandemic happened halfway through. So I went online, and I made them available to the public, and the lectures, that is. And I found that they had a wide viewership, including some of my faculty colleagues, but also people elsewhere in the world. And my editor and literary agent said, "Hey, this is going to be your next book. And I agreed. So the book Rationality combined tutorials on what I consider to be the seven essential tools of reasoning, uh, and a discussion of how and why people so often depart from them, from these normative models, as we call them in philosophy and psychology and economics.
Mhm. Beyond Kahneman, Tversky, and Slovic, one reason I thought it might have been particularly interesting to you from a purely academic perspective, the QAnon politics and current cultural environment aside, is your belief and research on the close relationship between language as a distinctly human phenomenon and then our capacity for reasoning and how those go hand in hand.
Indeed, and I did write a book called The Stuff of Thought. The subtitle was Language as a Window into Human Nature. And the idea behind that book is that the kind of uh, meanings that language is equipped to convey uh, are probably the way in which we conceptualize the world, the way we make sense of the world. That is, nouns could shed light on people's concepts of things or objects or entities. Verbs can shed light on agency and causation. Prepositions on how we uh, analyze the space and matter. Tense on how we conceptualize time. And even moving beyond that, the spread of names, for which there's a rich literature and philosophy, of course, can shed light both on the relationship between cognition and the world. That is, how do our concepts connect to the classes or entities in the world, but also uh, the dynamics of cultural virality. That is, if someone coins a new term, what leads it to catch on, and in cases where the rare cases in which each of us has complete say over the name for a thing, namely naming our babies, what determines changes over time, and what does that say about our social relationships. But I also talked about why certain zones of language, taboo terms like swearing and racial epithets, engage our basically the limbic system of the brain, our emotional circuitry. Why are some words considered to have dreadful magical powers, as in prayers and curses and taboo terms? And also, another question of long interest to philosophers is why is the intended content of our language so often a departure from its literal content? The areas explored by Paul Grice. We don't
Yeah.
generally blurt out what we mean in so many words, but the listener has to connect the dots, read between the lines. And despite that, the huge literature in the border between philosophy and linguistics on conversational implicature, very few people ask the question, why do we bother? Why don't we just say what we mean? Why the innuendo and the euphemism and the indirect speech and the polite requests and all that? That obviously ties into our social psychology. So that's another dimension of psychology that I argued could be illuminated by the use of language. There's one other connection, though, and most scholars become interested in a topic for multiple reasons. But yet another reason that I became interested in rationality is that it's one of the drivers of human progress over the decades and centuries and millennia. And in fact, I ended the book Rationality by suggesting that one of the drivers of moral progress has been people making arguments, that great orators and philosophers and activists uh, trying to convince people that some practice of the time was inconsistent with values they claimed to hold or norms that they enforced elsewhere.
Hmm. You begin the book Rationality with a quote, and it is a quote by Bertrand Russell. And he says, "Man is a rational animal, so at least we have been told. Throughout a long life, I have searched diligently for evidence in favor of this statement. So far, I have not had the good fortune to come across it." So, if we want to preserve this idea that man is rational, what must rational mean? I mean, do you conceive of rationality as a sort of dispositional quality, in the sense that while not all people think or act reasonably, we evolved with this ability and are capable of acting in this way under the proper circumstances, as evidenced by like the forward march of human progress, even though in other instances, like with the QAnon or vaccine conspiracies that you mentioned, we're clearly not acting rationally.
Yeah, a couple of things. Um, One is forget March, forget relentless, forget inevitable. That's not how progress works. It's not like a march. It's more like Sisyphus, except a little more optimistic than Sisyphus in that it isn't zero advancement, but that is it's like two steps forward, one step back. But progress of the kind that I've tried to document quantitatively is something that we eke out through, I argue, applications of reason in service of human betterment. That is, obviously, reason can be deployed for anything, including better bioweapons or nuclear weapons. But to the extent that we use it to cure disease, to push back against hunger, to resolve wars, to increase safety, then we can make uh, piecemeal advances. And if we keep the ideas that work, if we try not to repeat our mistakes, then there can be a forward vector to our movement, even though there's a lot of zigging and zagging.
Mm-hmm.
Second, that Bertrand Russell quote that I use as an epigraph for the first chapter, of course, was followed by another quote from Spinoza.
Mm-hmm.
He that can carp in the most eloquent or acute manner at the weakness of the human mind is held by his fellows as almost divine. So that was a wry comment on the fact that it's kind of cheap to take pot shots at human reason. And indeed, there's plenty to take pot shots at because humans can be, as we know, both from reading the news and research in cognitive psychology, excuse me, there's no shortage of blunders and fallacies and idiocies that people are capable of. But it's to dismiss human rationality altogether, as Russell did, that can't be right either. For one thing, Russell himself is a human being. He's not, an angel. He's not a space alien. So if he's capable of reason, then he's a human being, and so are all of us when we either hold human reasoning in practice up to a standard of rationality. Well, we have to be capable of entertaining that standard. But also, we have, not all of us all the time, but our species has gone to the moon, invented vaccines, smartphones, figured out DNA and the Big Bang and plate tectonics. Also, in our everyday lives, we humans have infested the entire planet. We've managed to live in deserts and in the Arctic and in rainforests and savannas. We did it not because we're the fastest or best armed or highest flying animal, but by our wits. We figured out ways of exploiting our environment, of extracting calories and protein, often at the expense of other species, but that's because we've outwitted them. And people in their everyday lives couldn't last a day unless they had some degree of rationality. Fridges don't fill themselves with food, and gas doesn't put itself in the car, and kids don't get off to school clothed and fed unless we arrange the environment to make that happen. So there's got to be some big endowment of rationality that makes all those feats possible. And the challenge really for a psychologist, and I guess also a philosopher, is how do you account both for the fact that we're capable of feats of rationality, but also of such colossal and conspicuous blunders. Finally, you asked about what the concept of rationality itself, and indeed, it can be used in two senses. There is the normative sense of what counts as rational. What are the benchmarks? What's the ground truth? What really does follow from what else? Which collectively our best minds at their best moments try to articulate. And then there's and that is closer to philosophy. That's the normative aspect. Then, of course, there's the psychological or descriptive or empirical aspect of how does the human brain work? What are the pathways that it tends to take, either left to its own devices or with the help of tools that we've invented over the millennia and try to spread in education and writing.
Hmm. You mentioned that the problem, or one problem, is that we have to account for why we're capable, on the one hand, of these crazy feats like figuring out the Big Bang or creating COVID vaccines fueled by rationality. But then on the other hand, we have QAnon irrationality. And I think, if I'm remembering correctly, in the introduction to rationality, you said that our ancestors, or you described our ancestors, the hunter gatherer ancestors, as cer- cerebral problem solvers. And it seems like something has we evolved to have these these features of rationality, but something has changed in our contemporary environment that has resulted in us no longer exhibiting these features at all times.
I put it slightly differently, and even though I am, I make a lot of use of evolutionary psychology in all of my writings, but there is a kind of mean from evolutionary psychology, at least a popular understanding. I think not that many evolutionary psychologists would subscribe to it, that I try to resist, which is we evolved on the savannah, we could get eaten by a lion at any time, therefore the human brain is just constantly on the alert to any sign of danger, so we react instinctively, and that's why we fear the wrong things. That's why we act on hunches, because if we didn't, we'd get eaten by predatory cats.
Mm.
Now, I mean, I think there's a grain of truth to that, but it doesn't do our species justice. It doesn't do evolutionary psychology justice, because we are deeply weird mammals, deeply weird primates even. All mammals are nervous at a rustle in the bushes that could portend a predator. But we've kind of gone beyond that. On top of those reflexes, we also figure out how the environment works and try to outwit both predators and prey. And that's why I started the book with a fairly a detailed look into the lives of the San people of the Kalahari Desert, some of the last surviving hunter-gatherers. And based on the fieldwork of Louis Liebenberg, a tracking expert, he noted that there's an awful lot of induction and deduction, and I guess abduction, and debate and deliberation and reasoning from circumstantial evidence, counterfactual reasoning, um, uh, in the process of tracking animals, which he argues was one of the main forms of hunting that the hunter-gatherers engaged in. Since we can't outrun an antelope, they're much faster than we are. However, one advantage that we do have is that we're naked, so we can shed heat. We're bipedal, so we don't have that much surface area being baked by the sun, and we sweat, so we can cool ourselves off. And so antelope are better at the 100-yard dash, but we're better marathon runners.
Right.
And as long as we know which way to run, that is, after an animal has darted over the horizon, our ancestors were able to infer from the evidence they left behind, the tracks and other spoor droppings and disturbed shrubbery, which way they probably went, based on kind of deep hypothetical reasoning of what kind of animal was likely to leave the track, what was its condition, what was its likely intention. And so we could slowly and steadily pursue them until they keeled over from heat stroke, and then we could dispatch them with a spear or a rock to the head. But it's cognition that made that style of hunting possible. And Liebenberg suggested that the skills involved in tracking, I don't think it's only involved in tracking, but they're an example of how the hunter-gatherers who are so easy to blame for our fallacies and biases and quick responses actually were lived by their wits and had to be pretty smart. Those are the brains that we inherited. And it isn't just just in tracking, but also in extracting poisons from plants and insects and certain organs in animals, um, ways of devising snares and traps, and ways of smoking animals out of burrows, multi-step reasoning that required a pretty sophisticated grasp of cause and effect, the assembly of complex means and ends, and so on. Now, in terms of the modern environment, it's not that we no longer have to figure out how the physical world works. Every time we solve a problem, we've got a wobbly table and we stick a folded up napkin under one of the legs. We're reasoning about our physical environment. Here's what I think is special about the modern environment. It's almost the other way around. It's not that it's doesn't have opportunities to apply rationality, but it has opportunities that in realms that our ancestors could not conceivably have applied rationality to, such as what is the ultimate cause of disease and misfortune? What is the origin of the planet and the species? How do plants and animals really work? What happened 100 years ago? How is power wielded, and what are the decision-making processes of the people who have the most power? Now, these are things that in these realms which are beyond our everyday experience. They're not the actual physical things around us. They occur long ago in time, at microscopic scales, at cosmic scales, in remote corridors of power that we can't eavesdrop in ourselves. We very recently have acquired the ability to reason in these more remote, cosmic, hypothetical domains. We've got science, we've got logic, we've got journalism, we've got professional history, we've got archives, records, data. All of these are gifts of the last couple of hundred years, basically since the Enlightenment. But we didn't evolve with those. And so when it comes to reasoning beyond our everyday experience, then I think the default human mindset is reasoning is kind of beside the point because you can't know. There's nothing to go on. There's no evidence anyway. And so myth is a suitable way of understanding the world beyond the immediate senses. That is, what should you believe about why bad things happen to good people? What should you believe about how powerful people have directed the course of history? What should you believe about the origin of humans and of life and the planet? Well, we should believe uplifting morality tales, ones that make you and your people look good. And I think we divide the world into these zones of the immediate experience where we actually are pretty rational, and this more mythological, cosmic, hypothetical, abstract realm where we children of the Enlightenment think, well, we should be rational about that too. We should only believe things that are true. We should try to determine whether our beliefs are true. We should look at evidence. We should develop better analytic tools. That's what is foreign to the human psyche. And their evolution is relevant. Namely, forget 10,000 years ago, 200 years ago, there was nothing to go on. And so it's not surprising that we don't naturally think that these domains are proper applications of human rationality.
Returning for a moment to the Bushmen you were speaking about, do you conceive of the cognitive biases we alluded to earlier as shortcuts in a sense that just in fact don't cause problems most of the time for people like these Bushmen, but that save on cognitive resources? Is
That
that
is,
why we evolved them?
I actually don't think I wouldn't put it exactly that way. That is, I don't think they are saving on cognitive resources because again, going back to the Sod, they think long and hard about which animal left those tracks, or whether it's fresh or tired or old or young or male or female. I want to move away from the idea that we only that we're constantly conserving mental resources, though we do. But I don't think that's the only problem. It's before there was science, before were data sets, what did you have to go on? The heuristics and biases that people like Tversky and Kahneman have documented aren't necessarily shortcuts. They're the best you can do before science existed, or if you don't know about scientific resources. So, for example, let's be concrete. The one of the major biases that I have written about is the availability bias or the availability heuristic, namely to estimate probability or risk. You see how of a particular kind of event, you recall an instance of that event, an anecdote, an image, and whatever is most available in memory is you use that as your estimate of how likely it is. So is it dangerous to swim in the ocean? Well, I read last week about someone who was eaten by a shark, so yeah, it really is dangerous. As opposed to looking up the data, comparing, say, how likely are you to get eaten by a shark compared to how likely are you to die in a car crash driving to the beach? The car crashes don't tend to attract the attention that the shark attacks do, and so our heads are turned by the gory, vivid, memorable anecdote. Now, I don't think it's saving time or saving resources. I think it's well, how many people have access to those data? How many people know that such data exists? Well, some do now, but no one did 100 years ago because those data didn't exist. There weren't government record keeping agencies that kept track of deaths from different causes. And that was not true not just 100 years ago, but 1,000 years ago, and 10,000 years ago, and 100,000 years ago. So our intuitions about probability and risk are fed by what we have to go on, namely our own experience together with the rumor and hearsay that is the experience of other people. That's all there was. And so that's still what comes naturally to us. We have to be educated into the fact that we are the lucky beneficiaries of data, and and even then, often data sets can be distorted by their own kinds of biases. But that's not a natural lesson to learn. To go to it used to be go to an almanac, now it's go to the internet and look up the best data. Now, it's not surprising that that's not instinctive or not intuitive. I'll mention one other reason that some of these heuristics and biases aren't just shortcuts. They're not just ways of saving cognitive effort. The other reason, and this is pointed out by Gerd Gigerenzer, is that they're going to the data is inherently uncertain because the question is which data. If I want to look at, say, what's likely to kill me, should I look at data for Americans? Should I look at data for men? Should I look at data for men in their 60s? Should I look for the data for Ashkenazi Jews? Should I look for the data for Ashkenazi Jews with a family history of heart disease? Like, which data do you look at? And there's no correct answer, because the smaller the category, obviously the more relevant the data are, but the smaller the category, the fewer the data there are and the noisier the estimates. Now, when it comes to anecdotes, things that you've actually lived through, or things that you've heard about from people in your neighborhood, people like you, it has a built-in advantage that it's far more applicable to you. Now, the disadvantage, of course, is that it's a small sample size, sometimes only one, but it's just part of the trade-off between specificity and reliability, way over in the direction of specificity. But it's not inherently irrational, and it's not just a question of saving a few milliseconds of decision time.
Returning to another thing you mentioned earlier, you said that myth is a suitable way of understanding the world beyond the immediate senses.
Well, I wouldn't say suitable, but it is instinctive and natural. I think it's not suitable, and normatively, I would argue against it. But psychologically, that's the way we're put together.
And what I am wondering is the idea that if we don't have these contemporary tools of rationality at our disposal, you mentioned logic, critical thinking, probability, these sorts of things, it's natural that, or it's not normative. It's not what we should be doing, but it's natural that we turn toward this mythology mindset.
Yes, that's it, that. In other words, it's a psychological claim that in these more remote, non-immediate, hypothetical, metaphysical, counterfactual, historical, um, do- microscopic domains, we we turn to myth rather than our best science. And the myth generally, very often, is moralistic. It holds out lessons for who's good, who's evil, how one ought to behave.
Now, do you conceive of some of the conspiracy theories that we mentioned earlier, like QAnon or vaccine hoaxes, as being a product of this mythology mindset, or no?
Exactly. And that, in fact, I'm glad that you connected the dots there because
Okay.
that's why I had not yet brought that up, but that's exactly why I think it's relevant. Namely, it's not so clear that people who believe in these outlandish conspiracy theories, what we actually mean by believe, because in this domain of the non immediately experienced, uh, I think people don't think of them in the same way they think of, gee, is there beer in the fridge, as something that is factually true or false, and that where there's a way to find out. They think that the reason that you should believe it is because it's morally uplifting, it has the right uh, 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 morals. So, and the reason that I think that, and here I'm influenced by arguments from Hugo Mercier and Dan Sperber and uh, Bob Abelson and other social and cognitive psychologists, is that it's kind of people's actual commitment to some of these beliefs is a little squirrely. So, for example, people who promote these wicked, nefarious conspiracy theories headed by an all directed by a shadowy but all powerful government. How come they're just blurting them out in their manifestos and in their conversations? Aren't they worried about being uh, hurried away to the gulag or they be silenced if it's such an all powerful conspiracy? There's a little bit of a gaming aspect to it, and in fact, people have compared QAnon to a multi-person online game. They search for clues. It's a lot of fun. They try out. People compete with each other for different ways of interpreting ambiguous evidence, and um, and the actions that people take are really not commensurate often with the gravity of the so-called beliefs. Again, I'll give an example from Mercier. He noted that some of the believers in QAnon and in Pizzagate, the predecessor of QAnon, according to which Hillary Clinton ran a child sex ring out of a Washington pizzeria. If you really believe that children are being raped in the basement of a pizzeria, what you'd ordinarily do is call the police. But what believers in this conspiracy theory did is they leave a 1-star review on Yelp for the pizzeria. So there's a disconnect between how you actually act and what you supposedly believe, which suggests that these beliefs are really more kind of affirmations of a kind of faith, loyalty to a particular coalition, than they are true epistemic commitments to a state of affairs. Another way you could test this is by seeing how much people are willing to bet on them, on these beliefs. Should they become every verifiable? I don't know if that's ever been done, and in some cases there probably are true believers, but I suspect in a lot of cases people would not be willing to put their money where their mouths are.
Something I find striking, though, about these conspiracy theories is that many aren't formulated in the absence of these rational faculties, but in the absence of using them properly. So I recall this was sort of funny to me. Somebody, a flat earther that I was talking to, was explaining to me why we never went to the moon. And their explanation employed the Van Allen radiation belts. They said that we could never get past the Van Allen radiation belts because we would all be obliterated by the radiation. And it's the same with the vaccine conspiracy theories. People suddenly become experts in mRNA and all sorts of other issues.
Oh yes, the 9/11 truthers say that the heat of the inferno was not enough to melt steel. Ignoring the fact that steel didn't have to melt, all it had to do was weaken. But yes,
Mm-hmm. But
but yeah, no, you're right. People will deploy their rational faculties uh, to prop up these beliefs, up to a certain point.
mhm. And you write in the book though about the contrast between irrationality within an individual on the one hand and irrationality within a community on the other. And is this not just an issue of scale? Because while certainly, I mean, irrational beliefs can be transmitted quickly within a community, but it's not as if individuals are immune to their own paranoias or superstitions or other fallacious modes of thought. But maybe this is where um, things like motivated reasoning and the my side bias come in.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you brought that up. It is germane. So yes, in a sense, although it's not just a matter of scale, there are aspects of collective rationality that are a matter of scale, sometimes called the wisdom of crowds. And one famous example, I think, was made famous by a TED talk. You pull a cow on stage. Literally, the speaker pulls a cow on stage. I forget who it was, and asks people to estimate its weight. And how much does a cow weigh? Beats me. But you force me to make a guess. I'll make a guess. And so people write their guess on a slip of paper. They hand them to the front. Someone very quickly pulls out a calculator, does the average. Turns out the average of the 300 or 400 people in the audience is within the correct weight of the cow to like a pound or something uncanny like that. So that is a case of scale where you average people's proximate beliefs and it gets closer and closer to reality. So I think that exists, but that isn't exactly what I had in mind because if it's just a question of scale, there's also the madness of crowds. People um, sign on to millennial cults, and entire societies can be under the subject of delusions like Nazi Germany. Uh, I think what is crucial is together with scale, and maybe even instead of scale, it's having certain um, norms and rules and procedures that are explicitly designed to push the collective in the direction of greater truth, greater reason, despite the flaws in human nature. So there are things like now all of them are imperfect, but put them together and they can be better than an unaided single human mind. Things like um, peer review, things like freedom of speech of the press so that ideas can be criticized, things like demand for empirical testing, things like adversarial procedures where a proponent and an opponent debate something and a audience allows themselves to be persuaded or not. Deliberative democracy, separation of powers, checks and balances. So all of these, unless a community has implemented these rules, they could just become victims of the madness of crowds, the most spellbinding orator, the most viral and attractive theory. It's only if both you have these norms and the norms themselves are explicitly designed to approach the truth. I think it's that is how collectives of minds can be more rational than individual minds. When we contrast the flaws and fallacies and biases of people against our best benchmarks, against our ground truth, these are always accomplishments of the entire scientific, philosophical, and mathematical establishment. Now, again, these rules aren't foolproof, and we know that peer review has problems, and there can be academic cults, scientific personality cults, but the rules themselves have to be subject to rational scrutiny and replaced by better ones when their own flaws are exposed.
Hmm. And two key terms you bring up in the book that are more aligned with the or more relevant to the irrationality of groups rather than the rationality of groups are rumor and folk wisdom. And am I right in imagining that there is probably lots and lots of very fascinating literature in the annals of psychology journals about just why our otherwise largely rational faculties are so susceptible to them?
Yeah, I don't know if it's large, but there are indeed certain kind of folk intuitions that are deeply rooted and that probably were the best that our ancestors could do in a pre-scientific environment. For example, and this is something that has been developed by often by evolutionary psychologists and cognitive development researchers like my colleague Susan Carey,
Who just retired, I saw.
who just retired just last week. Yes.
I
Uh,
actually just interviewed your former colleague Paul Bloom, and we were talking about her work. We also talked a bit about your paper, with the first paper he published. The two of you published it together about language and evolution, and he was telling me, I thought this was very funny that you two were going to debate Chomsky and Stephen Jay Gould, and he was a bit terrified about it. And then Chomsky's back went out, and it just never happened.
well, we did have a public debate with Stephen Jay Gould and Massimo Piatelli Palmarini.
Ah, okay.
It was an associate of Chomsky, and it was Massimo who was the impresario for the famous Chomsky-Piaget debate in the mid '70s. And Massimo's still active, and Massimo had written a paper in Cognition, which captured some of the views of Chomsky. So he was a natural proponent of it, and it was Massimo's paper that egged Paul and me on to write our paper, Natural Language and Natural Selection. But getting back to your question, I think we all, for example, approach chemistry and biology with essentialist intuitions that there is a kind of invisible substance or core or essence that gives living things their power and their properties. We are teleologists. We think just because the same way that our own lives are directed by our goals, our plans, our projects, our artifacts clearly are designed with a function in mind. We tend to think that the laws of the universe have a purpose or a goal. We're in, and this is an idea that Paul himself has pushed, that we're intuitive dualists. We think that we're
Right.
composed of minds and bodies which can part company. All of these intuitions, I think, feed a lot of the beliefs that modern science has shown to be irrational. That is, that we have a soul as opposed to thought and consciousness coming out of patterns of processing in the brain, that we have an essence as opposed to being composed of molecular biology, of tiny little gears and springs and magnets, that the laws of the universe care about our well-being as opposed to, or care about anything as opposed to being strictly causal and forward-looking, not causal and I should say determined by the present, not goal-directed. And the mismatch between the view of the world provided by our best science and the view of the world that's built into our intuitions is another source of irrationality. A scientific education consists not just of learning science, but consists of learning folk intuitions, at least ideally.
With regard to this, you mentioned Paul has argued that humans are intuitive dualists. This is when I talked to Chomsky. He said something I thought was very funny. I don't think he meant it as a joke, but he said one way in which philosophy has gone wrong is that philosophers insist on treating everything above the head, above the neck, differently from everything below the neck, and I got a chuckle out of that. But
Yeah. Well, he's often made that comparison in particular to as a kind of plausibility preparation for the idea that language and other aspects of the mind are innately organized in the same way that the way Chomsky does it as well. No one would say you learn to have a heart or learn to have a spleen or a kidney. Why do we say we learn to have a language faculty?
well, I'd like to shift slightly, maybe for the last 15 or so minutes of our talk. And your last book was on the Enlightenment, I mean, before rationality. And the historical movement aside, just how do you think of Enlightenment or humanism, and how, though, does it explicitly relate to rationality?
Yeah, and I'm glad that you made that distinction because the the book was not intended to be a historical homage
Right.
to a bunch of guys who wrote in the late 18th century, but rather to the as a rubric for certain ideals that were most uh, forcefully articulated in that era. But it's the ideals that I tried to promote. No, those were kind of expressed in the subtitle of the book, The Case for Reason, Science, Humanism, and Progress. So it begins with reason. That is, we should figure out the world and our lives and our morality by the application of reason rather than alternatives like revelation, tradition, dogma, intuitive certainty. That science is, I think, just the application of reason to the natural world. Humanism is the moral commitment to human flourishing as the goal of our striving, the moral goal, as opposed to alternatives such as carrying out commandments in scripture, achieving feats of heroic greatness, striving for the dominance or preeminence of a particular race or ethnic group or nation. And finally, progress is the uh, predicted outcome of applying reason and science to human well-being, namely that it should be possible. Namely, we can be um, empowered or energized and reassured that applying reason to human well-being is worthwhile by the fact that when we do it, we can occasionally succeed.
And again, the historical movement aside, because I'm not sure what was happening in this time period, but is one of the at least contemporary principles of Enlightenment free speech?
Yeah, I would say so because it is uh, it's an implication of the combination of rationality as an ideal and a recognition of the flaws in human reasoning. Namely, if you want to get closer to the truth, closer to coherence, closer to morally defensible positions, you can't rely on one guy. You can't rely even on one clique. You can't rely on dogma, on brute force, because those are likely to lead us astray. It's only by venturing ideas and evaluating them that we have any hope of approaching or implementing these normative ideals of rationality.
And this, of course, I mean, presupposes that the listeners or even the speakers have this rational faculty endowed in them, and they aren't going to uh, twist words or misinterpret them or spout conspiracy theories and become swayed by them.
Well, and some will, but not all of them all the time. To paraphrase Abraham Lincoln, you can't fool all the people all the time. At least what we hope we can't. Uh, that there are clearly going to be people who are beyond the reach of reason. So when people say, "Well, how are you going to convince a devotee of QAnon that there isn't a cabal of pedophiles in the deep state?" Maybe you can't. It's like the question: how are you going to convince the Pope that Jesus did not rise from the dead and was not the Son of God? Well, the answer is you can't. I mean, you shouldn't try. That's hopeless. But fortunately, not everyone is the Pope. There are people who are at the fringes of or not at the core of these conspiracy communities, who aren't that committed, and they might be open to reason. There are new babies born all the time, and they weren't born with the belief in QAnon or Catholicism or anything else. So there are audiences that are worth trying to persuade, and everyone is, in a sense, committed to reason in that everyone believes their own beliefs are rational. That is, and this is a point made by Thomas Nagel and others, that the case for relativism, subjectivism, is inherently compromised by the fact that a very few proponents of any position, including relativism and subjectivism, are willing to apply it to themselves. Namely, if you say, okay, you are casting doubt on rationality, is what you just said rational? Or there's no such thing as objectivity. And you can say, well, is that statement objective? If it isn't, why should I believe it? And if it is, well, you just contradicted yourself. So there is, and I think that's not just a gambit. It's not just a kind of a debating trick, but it is there. It does speak to why, I do think over the long run, given free speech, given a community of people committed to the truth, the truth does kind of leak out. We eke it out bit by bit, and that's just because we just can't get away from rationality if we want to be taken seriously, any of us, including proponents of subjectivity and relativism and non-reason.
And these conspiracy theories aside, though, you you write in your introduction to Rationality that some people believe analytical thinking must be subordinated to social justice. And were there any examples in particular that you had in mind in writing that, or are there any that come to mind now where people have held this belief?
Oh my goodness! Yes, it's kind of becoming it's the ascendant attitude in universities.
Mhm.
The beliefs such as, do men and women differ on average in their cognitive or personality characteristics? Are police shootings racially biased? Um, is there such a thing as rapid onset gender dysphoria? And are there social influences in the massive growth of transgender adolescents or pre-adolescents? Good luck in saying that we should try to get to the bottom of those answers by looking at data. Those are cases where merely uh, uh, proposing, even asking those questions, can sometimes taint people, and there can be efforts to cancel them
Right.
for this. The acceptable belief is the one that aligns with certain supposedly social justice objectives.
And I mean, it's somewhat ironic that to argue that analytical thinking must be subordinated to social justice requires analytical thinking to do so. But just to play devil's advocate with some of these cases, maybe, are there not cases in which this might be the right thing to do? I mean, you write that we ought to follow reason, but I'm asking if you think that there are places that we oughtn't follow it, or if you can at least reconstruct the opinion or the views or the beliefs of the quote unquote social justice warriors who do feel this way and give them a charitable case.
I mean, I think the most charitable case is that if someone is willfully ignorant of particular facts in order to pursue a clearly harmful agenda. A Nazi who really believes that Jews are a parasitical race, contrary to any kind of evidence. You, it is legitimate not to give them, credit for simply believing something for which there's a lot of evidence, or that Africans are inherently suited to slavery. I think nowadays one doesn't have to indulge that belief because it's so the consequences are so harmful, and the epistemic basis of the belief so not even tenuous but non-existent, that one can attribute malevolent motives to people who are wall themselves off from obvious evidence that their beliefs are false. Um, but I think the widest possible berth has to be carved out for analytic thinking, reason, rationality, simply because the basis for social justice has to be a factual understanding of the world: who is suffering, who isn't, what will make people's lives better, what will make it worse, what are the causes of current suffering, and how can we best alleviate them. And the fact that in history, a lot of the great movements towards social justice did not blow off reason. Quite the contrary, as I showed in the final chapter, these they made very rigorous analytic arguments. Frederick Douglass was not, he was an orator, not just in the sense of the music and poetry of his speech, but he was razor sharp in showing why the case for slavery at the time was completely bogus. Likewise, the case for democracy as opposed to absolute monarchy, the case for the political equality of women, the case for the civil rights movement in the 60s, the case for gay rights. You didn't have to marginalize reason, and reason was on the right side.
Hmm. And you mentioned that within the academy, within universities, these social justice issues are standing in the way of analytical thinking. And in this sort of toolbox of rationality, you mentioned we have, I mean, logic, critical thinking, probability, decision theory, all of these things. Your colleagues at Stanford, Yale, Princeton, all of these places, many of them are highly educated and skilled in these areas, but at the same time, they might believe that rationality should be, or analytical thinking should be subjugated to social justice. And what is the pitch that you would make to try to sway them from this view?
Well, that they themselves, in pursuing that argument, are committing themselves to objectivity, rationality, reason. Um, if not, then the rest of us are free to blow off anything that they say. And since they probably don't want everyone to blow off what they say, they have to make the case that they're applying reason to make the arguments that they're making. So that's number one. Number two, that they themselves have to be committed to certain empirical, objectivist, realist um, commitments in making their own sacred arguments, like is climate change real? Is racism pervasive? Are vaccines effective? Is human activity warming the planet? Um, in all of those cases, they would reject claims that we should subordinate reason and evidence to moralistic thinking. And historically, again, I would bring up the fact that it was never necessary to repress speech in order to advance social justice. In the case of the civil rights movement, slavery, women's empowerment, and so on. Quite the contrary, it was repression of speech that often was used against the forces of social progress in their day. It was the advocates of abolition who were often criminalized, or of gay rights.
Hmm. And since this is very hot news, it's about like a month old at this point. In April, you formed, along with I think over 100 other Harvard faculty, and I don't know how many it is now, the Council on Academic Freedom, which you co-lead. Just what is it, and what is the purpose or goal of the council? How's it going to work?
It's quite new. It has several goals. One of them is to try to educate the greater Harvard community about the what academic freedom and freedom of speech consists of, and what are the arguments for it. A second is to provide support, both institutional and emotional, for people who are targets of repression and smear campaigns and libel, because it can be devastating. A third is to try to get our own administrators to apply policies that are already on the books for the protection of academic freedom, that someone cannot be punished or fired or silenced for a reasoned opinion, and also to apply pressure when a dean, an administrator, is being pressured by an activist group, a social media mob, to repress speech or freedom or punish an individual, to push back from the other side. Because we have seen very often university administrators just want to make trouble go away as quickly as possible. So they will accede to any pressure campaign to not make waves, to make it go away. If by applying pressure in the other direction, we hope to force them to actually make a reasoned decision instead of the most expedient action or verbiage that will make a problem go away.
You mentioned that part of the council's purpose is to offer emotional and institutional support. And I'm wondering if you've personally had work or opinions suppressed or felt the pressure to do so in the face of potential retaliation from activists or colleagues. And if so, I mean, what sort of toll this took on you?
Yeah, not at Harvard, and I've got to say, and in fact I did say this in the Boston Globe op-ed announcing the council. I've done just fine at Harvard. My department chairs, deans, presidents, pros, all of them very supportive. I personally have not had any problems. Um, I have had some nuisances outside of Harvard. I was the target of a petition that my name be removed from a list of experts from the Linguistic Society of America, and that I be stripped of my um, distinguished fellow status. It didn't go anywhere. The LSA did not accede to those demands, but based on some opinions that I expressed in a set of tweets, um, the that was even if it had gone through, which it hadn't, it would be a pretty minor nuisance. The but it, but I was the target, and I think the damage that it did was not to me, because I still have it on my CD. I take it off. It's a pretty minor inconvenience, but rather the message that it sends to people who are less powerful than me, who don't have a tenured position, hard money position at a brand name university. It's putting them on notice that if you express an opinion that runs afoul of the current orthodoxy, you're in our sights. Your career will be sidelined or ruined.
Well, Steve, this was really a terrific cap to 100 episodes of my show. So thanks so much for your generosity, your time, and joining me for this important conversation.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you for having me, Robinson, and thanks for allowing me to be the centennial or century or 100th guest. Real honor. Thank you.
Hold on, Geeslings. Before you go, please like, subscribe, follow if you haven't already. Smash all those buttons. And also, if you haven't followed me on Twitter at Robinson Earhart, or if you're not joining me every morning as I eat my pint of ice cream on Twitch at Robinson Earhart on Robinson Eats, please do so.